Tim, I said that Jack Smith probably did more than anyone else. I erred in saying that because you and the members of the January 6th Select Committee in Congress certainly all share that designation of doing more than anyone else to make sure the facts are known. But there was something different about hearing Jack Smith in his own voice say he had the goods to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump committed crimes on January 6th.
Yep, exactly right, Nicole. Jack had a hammer that we didn't have, right? The ability to hold people accountable and bring criminal charges. When I listened to that clip and his testimony, it's exactly the same story that the Select Committee told. But the Select Committee can only uncover facts, can only educate people. Jack Smith had, again, a tool, which is the criminal justice system, to use those facts to hold Donald Trump and others accountable. And hearing him finally do what he didn't have a chance to do in a courtroom in Washington, D.C., and articulate those facts in the credible, careful way that he did, it's very compelling.
So he said there in that clip, and we'll play more of it. I promised with Andrew yesterday on the air to do so, and we will. But he said that they had developed evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump caused January 6th and that he exploited it. And then he went on to drill down on the fake electors part of what we saw in your report, but obviously we never saw that evidence in the trial. But he said he made false statements to state legislatures. I mean, just for the thought exercise, what would we have seen if this had gone to trial?
Yeah, we would have seen a multi-part conspiracy, Nicole, that started with lawsuits. Every candidate has the right to file lawsuits challenging the results of elections. And when those lawsuits were filed and unanimously rejected by judges around the country for lack of evidence, then the plot moved to phase two, which was pressure on state officials, pressure on members of Congress, pressure on his own vice president, ultimately, to take action without basis in fact and law. That didn't work. And the final desperate lever plank of that conspiratorial plan was to launch this angry mob at the Capitol. What we developed over the course of our investigation, which I think Jack would have proven beyond a reasonable doubt at trial, was that this was, again, a sequence of events. You can't look at the violence in the Capitol in a vacuum. You have to plug it into things that began even before the election, when the seeds were planted to sow doubt in the integrity of the election.
Do you think that he would have called Mike Pence as a witness? That was one of the witnesses you didn't have access to, right?
Yeah. The special counsel went beyond what we did because, again, they have levers to pull that we didn't have. He was able to adjudicate the vice president's privilege assertions, get a judge to say, no, you don't have a privilege, a speech and debate privilege, an executive privilege, and compel him to testify in the grand jury. He did that with Mark Meadows. He did that with lots of witnesses that we didn't speak to. But all that did, Nicole, was reinforce the core narrative, which, again, intentional, multi-part plan. I don't know whether he would have called Mike Pence. My guess is Mike Pence is a victim in addition to being a fact witness. There's sort of some emotional, compelling information that he would provide about how it felt to be 40 feet from rioters fleeing to a loading dock in the Capitol as people are chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." That could have been very evocative testimony, in addition to all the pressure that he felt from the president. So perhaps, right, knowing the facts, those are pretty central to this conspiracy. But he had a long list of witnesses, almost all of whom were Republicans, were loyal to the president, who wanted him to win. Jack Smith made this point in his interview. The witnesses were generally not angry Democrats who were trying to pin something unfairly on President Trump, but people within his own inner circle, within his own government, within his own White House, within his own family. And that would have given them more credibility.
And Andrew, just to remind everyone, because I think that one of the ways Trump benefits is that people forget that the reason Jack Smith is testifying before Congress about having facts to establish beyond a reasonable doubt and prevail in a trial, which is the standard for the Department of Justice to indict anyone, but especially a former president. The case didn't fall apart. The witnesses didn't die. The witnesses didn't back out. The facts didn't become something else. New evidence wasn't presented. Donald Trump ran as, quote, your retribution, and won. And Donald Trump made the case go away. And the Republicans who had Jack Smith in that hearing room know that. So tell me what you make of the spectacle of the hearing itself.
So in terms of the spectacle of the hearing, one thing that is important to note is that it is standard operating procedure for special counsels to be called and for Congress to hear from them in a public setting, not in a private setting that's released later, in a public setting. Jack Smith asked for that. He said, I'm willing to testify, but I want it to be public. But the Republicans were too afraid of doing that. And that is why it was done behind closed doors and then only put out at a time calculated to diminish its impact on New Year's Eve. Of course, not the day that everyone's waiting to hear from Jack Smith. So this is already out of the norm. I should point out Rob Hur publicly testified. Robert Mueller publicly testified. John Durham publicly testified. So this was already the Republicans hiding the ball. And when you hear from Jack Smith, and I'm so glad you played this clip, and everyone can hear all 8 hours if they want to now on YouTube, you can see why they did that. Because to quote you yesterday, he does have the goods, and he goes through the nature of the evidence, and that is still there. It is striking to me that the White House today, of all days, put out fake information from a government website, the White House website, saying that it's the Democrats' fault. They suggest that it's the Capitol Police's fault, as if the Capitol Police want to have themselves be hurt. And none of that is anything that members of Congress and the members of the Trump first administration who were present that day they all know it's false. They all know that the president didn't lift a finger to stop the violence. If he, as they says now, was so concerned about the violence because he really wanted something to be peaceful, why didn't he do anything about it? Why did he issue the tweet that Jack Smith references, which endangered the vice president of the United States? Why did he have to be sort of harangued to do anything to stop the violence? All of that is missing from the White House announcement. So we are really in a dark place when, as what you started, which is we thought this was going to be a turning point 5 years ago, and instead we have a White House that is embracing a completely fictitious narrative that doesn't begin to answer all the questions of what we know to be true and what the Republicans who were present that day know to be true.